Hello and welcome back to the course. Today we're going to be adding to our previously created entity Spawn Manager and giving it the ability to spawn enemies. We're also going to kind of make it so it can keep track of how many are alive and give us more options for expanding upon our game and level creation in the future. Now, there is so much we can do when it comes to like how we want to kind of keep track of how they're alive. It's kind of a big thing with just a few lines of code, and it makes a massive difference for some of the other things we want to do. So to get this started, all we want to do first is go into our entity spawn manager. You can see here I've added a timer, and that is because I'm going to delete that. This is the second time I have to actually record this. I managed to bump my hard drive and crap the video that I just recorded. So let's go and add a timer to the entity spawn manager. We're going to call this the entity spawn timer. There we go. Hit Control S and save. We'll go into the script. Now, as I said, I recorded this before and it was a bit corrupted. So if there is any tiny differences in this that aren't what we had before, please let me know and I will try and explain in the comments. But I think everything should be the same. So what we want to do is we've added a timer. We're now going to want to kind of clean this up a bit, right? We have our player variables here and a player function. Now I want to keep player variables actually separated from enemy variables, just in the script itself, because that will just be easier for us to read. Now to do that, we can highlight all of the code for the variables, right click, and then create a code region. Now we can call this the player region. And this gives us a little collapsible menu basically for how we want to, well, just for reading the code, and it just kind of keeps it cleaner. Now, the other thing we can do above the region, I mean, technically we can do this inside of the region just to make it more clear, I guess, that it is part of the player stuff, is we can do an exported category and name this player with a capital P. There we go. Hit Control S and save. And now what that kind of does is if we click on the enemy spawn manager, you'll see this new category pops up called player, and it has the enemy spawn or the player spawn position and the player pack scene. This is just the player category, and that will keep things separate for us. So with that in mind, let's go down and kind of start thinking about what we need. Well, one thing that we can do, because we've actually already done something similar, is we can go down to our handlers. Is it our handlers? It is not our handlers, it is our managers. And we can look at the collectible spawn manager. So let's open this up. We have the spawn timer. Let's go into the script. We have a timer min max, we have spawn points, we actually have the entity scene that we want to spawn, and we have a variable for the timer. Okay, how are we handling this? Well, we are just connecting that signal to something that will handle the spawns. We're getting a random time from a min max. Yeah, so that's kind of how we're handling the spawning of coins, right? And we can actually apply that exact same script to the enemies. So let's go and do that. Let's go to the entity spawn manager. Let's go and create an exported variable. So export var, this will be for the enemy spawn points. So enemy underscore spawn underscore points. They will be of type array. And that array will be specifically an array of marker 2Ds. Empty that, or open an empty array like so. Then we're going to need the enemy pack scene, like we have on the coin thing. We have the coin specific scene. So let's get the enemy underscore packed underscore scene. This will be of type pack scene. We'll set it equal to null. And now let's think about what else we need. Well, we're going to need an onReady variable for the entity spawn timer, because that's what's going to handle the spawning of our enemies, right? So we'll typecast this as well as a timer. What else? Well, I'm only going to want a maximum amount of enemies alive at any given time. Otherwise, it might just get a bit too overwhelming and there might just be a bit too much going on. So how do we create a max amount? Well, once again, it's very simple. We'll do another exported variable. This will be for the max underscore enemies underscore alive. It'll be of type int, set it equal to 0, so we can change it in editor, make it sure it's editable. So we now have the max enemies alive, but we're going to need to store a variable for how many enemies actually currently exist, right? So we're going to just create a new variable below our onReady, and we will call that the enemy underscore count. That will be of type int, and we'll set equal to 0. And that is all of the kind of variables we actually need set up for our enemies. So let's highlight all of that, create a code region, call this the enemy region. And at the very top of the region here, we're going to do another export category, and we will call this the enemy category. Now you'll notice as we move forward, I'm going to start to make sure the code and script is a little bit more kind of formalized or like specifically designed, right? It's going to start looking a bit prettier and a bit easier to follow because we're slowly actually moving out of the kind of prototyping phase, and it's starting to become more of like okay, how do we want to turn this into a full game? Now, that's specifically just with this phase at the moment. So when we move into like the upgrade system and the karma system, that's still going to be a bit prototypey, and we're going to figure that out as we go. But once we've kind of settled on what we want, we'll start using regions and categories and kind of making sure our scripts actually look good and kind of real, like feel good. So with that done, you can see here we have a new enemy category with the enemy specific variables. Let's hit Control S and save. And let's go to our base level where the enemy entity spawn, or just the entity spawn manager, exists. Now you can see here it already has the player spawn, and I would like to keep the player spawn and the markers for the enemy spawns separated. Now to do that, we can do two things. We can either add to the entity spawn manager, or we can add it here inside of the, like as a child just within the specific base level scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the entity spawn manager. I'm going to highlight entity spawn manager. I'm going to hit Control A, and I'm just going to add a node. I'm going to rename this the enemy spawn point container. A bit of a long name. Hit Control S and save. Go back to the base level. So what we're going to have to do is delete the entity spawn manager inside of here, hit Control Shift A on the base level, and then re-add a new entity spawn manager because that was apparently refusing to update. And I just realized it wasn't refusing to update, it's just because I didn't have editable children enabled. That is a thing, remember that. So we're going to need to kind of reset this up a little bit to make sure that we're spawning our player. So let's go kind of grab a player spawn point. We're going to just Control A and add a marker 2D here. This will be for the player spawn. We will move that player spawn to where we want it. So in the center of the screen, just here. Go and connect that player spawn. We now need the player packed scene. So let's go into our scenes folder, into our player folder, grab that. We'll click play and just make sure that is correct. And now the enemy spawn point container, we can start adding enemy spawn points. So if we click on this, once again, make sure you right click on the entity spawn manager and then add the editable children tick box. Make sure that's checked. So you get these options. We're going to hit Control A, add on the enemy spawn point container, marker 2Ds. So let's go and put the first marker in the bottom left corner, duplicate in the top left corner, duplicate in the top right corner, and duplicate in the bottom right corner. So I'm using Control D to duplicate these nodes. Now with those done, we can go to the enemy spawn points array here. We can add 4 because that's how many spawn points we have, and we can just add them. Now we need to add our enemy packed scene as well. So scenes, enemy, patroller, patroller enemy. That's the one that we're going to want to spawn. And we will set it so there's only 4 enemies alive max. Now the scene is set up, but the code is not. Right now, if I run this, it will do nothing. So let's go and start kind of creating a functionality around kind of doing that. So to start, we are going to first add the ready method at the very top, because we will need to connect that timeout signal from the entity spawn timer, right? That timeout signal is going to be the start of how it spawns enemies, and it's going to consistently kind of restart itself and keep spawning enemies if there is, basically slots available, it's not above a certain limit. Now, we're very quickly going to go and check the entity spawn timer in the entity spawn manager. And we want to make sure that this is set to auto start. We won't touch one shot like we did in the collectible spawn manager. You can see here this is on one shot and not auto start. It's a bit of a different way of doing it, because this script specifically is restarting the timer on a random time at the end of every run through, right? And we might want that in the future, but just for now, I don't think we do. Actually, no, we're going to go one step further than what I originally planned, because I really want to make this kind of pop a little bit. And the easiest way that we can kind of start doing stuff, this is me going a bit off track real quick. We're going to make a real quick change to the collectible spawn manager here, and we are going to change this function for the random time. So to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to copy this function. Actually, we can cut this function, so we'll use Control X to cut this function out. Now, this will start to throw some errors. That is completely okay. We're going to go to our auto loads, our node extensions, where we are doing all of our get containers, because this is going to be a new function that I want most nodes to be able to kind of use, and it's going to be the get random time function. Now, as you can see here, it's kind of like, well, what is the timer min, timer max? What is that? Well, those are going to now be parameters for our get random time function. So we'll do timer underscore min and timer underscore max. We'll make sure that they are both typecasted as floats as well. And now all we have to do is go back to the collectible spawn manager very quickly. And instead of just calling get random time, we now call the node extensions dot get random time. And we can pass in the timer min and the timer max that we already have created at the top of this script. Now that will do the exact same thing for us if I put pass in the ready function real quick in our other script so that doesn't crash. And it will do the same thing, right? The timers are currently set for 2 seconds to 4 seconds. So every 2 to 4 seconds, these coins will just randomly spawn. But we've now kind of pulled that little bit of functionality out to a global autoload script. So now anything can use that functionality for getting a random time or a random floating value. Which means, as I said, the entity spawn manager here can do the same thing. So with that in mind, let's actually go and change the timer here to one shot and auto start. So we'll leave auto start on and we'll leave it as one shot now. Because what we're going to need to do is, once again, we'll add some more exported variables to our enemy region here. We'll do the export var enemy underscore spawn underscore timer underscore min as a float. We'll set that equal to, let's go 0.1. And I'm going to copy this line and just paste it below. And then change the min to the max and change the max to 4.0. So we now have this new timer system ready to go. And we can just use that functionality from the node extensions that we just created to get it going as well. So let's get back to what we were doing again. We need to connect the entity spawn timer's timeout signal to a new function. And we need to create that new function afterwards. So let's go do that. Entity spawn timer, we'll do this in the ready function, dot timeout dot connect. And we'll connect that to, let's go on underscore enemy underscore spawn. So we'll call it. We'll come down to the bottom. We'll create a new function called on enemy spawn. Basically just copy paste the function name that we've done up here after the func. Give it a void return type because it doesn't need to return anything. And now we can kind of start working on spawning our enemies. The first big check we're probably going to want to do is checking how many enemies are alive, right? More specifically, we're going to want to make sure that we're not going over that maximum alive count. So to do that, we can just do a little if check, right? We can just go if the enemy count that we kind of set up is greater than or equal to the maximum amount of enemies alive, or max enemies alive. If it is greater than or equal to, return. Now you're probably wondering why I use greater than or equal to and not just equal to. And that is actually because there is the edge case where you can actually have more enemies alive than the maximum amount of enemies alive allows. And if that is the case, that is actually okay to an extent. Like give or take 1 or 2 enemies, that is actually fine. That adds a little bit more kind of randomness to it in its own weird way. Now the chance of that happening is extremely slim, but if it does, cool little bug that could actually kind of enhance the game sometimes. So after we've done our check, we now need to go about basically spawning this the same way we spawned our coins. We need to create a new coin, or in this case a new underscore enemy. So new variable, new enemy. This is going to be of type patrol enemy because that's the type of scene we're currently spawning. And I want to let you know, when it comes to using or spawning different enemies, we will be changing chunks of this code to make sure that we are spawning very, very, like we're using the spawn system as widely as possible without having it too coupled with certain scenes. So this patrol enemy specific or specification that we are making, don't be too concerned about that. That will change eventually. Yes, we want to set this equal to the enemy pack scene dot instantiate. And because I started talking halfway through that line, let's go over it again. New variable for the new enemy of type patrol enemy equal to the enemy pack scene dot instantiate. Now we have that, we're going to want to add the container that we want to make it a child of. In this case, it will be the entity underscore container. And that will be of type node 2D. And we can use that node extensions file that we created for .get entity container. And now we need to do that one check that we always do when it comes to trying to place things in the entity container, and that is checking if the entity container even exists. Because it's very awkward when you find out the entity container doesn't exist and things start crashing and you don't know why. So that's that check done. And let's go and check our collectible spawn manager and see how we are kind of spawning things, right? Okay, so we're doing it here. Let's move that line. We are first shuffling the array for the amount of spawn points, and then we are picking a random spawn point from that array and we're storing it as a variable. Then we are adding it, setting its position, and then resetting the spawn timer. Okay, so let's go and do that. Entity spawn manager. First thing we want to do, grab the enemy spawn points and then use .shuffle. Next thing we want to do is grab a variable for the chosen underscore enemy underscore n. I really cannot spell today. Enemy spawn underscore point. That will be of type marker 2D, and we'll set that equal to the enemy spawn points dot pick random. Okay, and now we need to go into our entity container dot add child. We want to add the new enemy, and finally we want to, as I said, set the enemy's position. So new underscore enemy dot position is equal to the chosen enemy spawn point dot position. And now we just need to reset our timer. So how do we reset our timer? Well, we grab our timer, we go enemy timer, so enemy spawn timer, there it is, dot start. And what do we want to pass in? Well, we've just pulled that functionality out and made it global, so let's go and use it. The node extensions dot get underscore random time. What do we pass into here? Well, we can pass in the enemy spawn timer min and max that we created. Enemy spawn timer min and the enemy spawn timer max. That's a bit of a long line, but that is a-okay. We can use a slash to kind of fix that a little bit, make sure it all kind of stays on one screen, but let's not do that because it's the other slash, pretty sure. There we go. That kind of keeps it all on one screen as much as possible. Probably help if I just pull that down. But yeah, that's it. We are getting our entire enemies spawned. We are resetting the timer. Now, what else do we want to do? Well, let's go and just check what happens right now. Well, it seems nothing. So after some quick bug testing, I figured out why it was not working, and it's just me I'm overlooking certain things. When videos corrupt, I get a bit flustered. So, what am I overlooking? If entity container. That's it. It's literally saying if entity container, and that means the entity container, regardless of if it exists or doesn't, it's going to return out of that statement. So let's just change that to if equals null. This is why breakpoints are so useful, by the way, because if I just leave this to run normally, like so, nothing will happen, right? The code will technically run, but nothing will happen, and it's very hard to see what's going wrong when there isn't an error. So the first thing that I do is I will slap a breakpoint on the function itself, and we'll see if the function runs. Now, this one can be a bit iffy. Sometimes it will stop, and sometimes, like in this instance, it won't. And that can be because of two reasons. Sometimes breakpoints on functions seem to only work when they actually return out of the function. In this case, it doesn't. So what I can do instead is go one line in and check and see if the enemy spawn count side of things is running. And as you can see, it immediately closed the game. It says here breakpoint, and then this happens and it pops right here. Now, using some of the debugging stuff, now I'm going to do a deep dive into debugging because it's extremely useful. I can use the either step into or step over functionalities here to kind of step into the code block and see what's happening, or step over the current code block and move forward. But in this instance, I want to step into. As you can see, okay, we passed this check. We're on this new line now, and this little arrow tells us which line the kind of game is currently on, what line it's currently trying to run. Okay, now it's going to go grab all of the checks and stuff and do all of the export variables. It's going to run through all of the setup for that specific enemy because it now exists. I'm going to stop this breakpoint because that will go on for a while. And I'm going to move to here, which is just if entity container. Now, if I click play, I give it about 3 seconds to kind of tab over, and now it clicks this. And this is the thing that actually let me know, because my brain didn't pick up the fact that that just says if entity container. So I used the step into function, and it hit the return functionality immediately, which means it's now not going to go and spawn the rest of this. That is the end of this function. So to fix that, we just set this equal to null. So if entity container is equal to null, return. Otherwise, continue. So now what should happen is if I just let it run, it should start spawning enemies, which it is now doing. So with that in mind, let's go and I did some edits to the code to change how the spawning was working to see if that was the problem. It was not. So I need to go back to the export category here, add a export for the var. You don't have to follow along, you probably have the code already, so don't worry about that. But export var enemy underscore spawn underscore timer underscore min. I thought this would have been the thing that may have been messing with it. It was not. Set that equal to 0.1. Copy that line. I said to my partner just a second ago that I think this video was cursed. I don't know if that's entirely wrong. We want to change that to the max, and at the very end of our on enemy spawn, we want to reset that timer. So enemy spawn timer dot start. And we want to use that new functionality for node extensions for get underscore random time, and we want to pass through the enemy spawn timer min and enemy spawn timer max. So now if I go into the base level here and I click on the enemy or the entity spawn manager, I should be able to change these times. Let's do 2 and 4. That'll give us a random time for the enemies to spawn with a maximum amount of, let's just do 12 just to kind of check how it looks when it spawns. So every 2 to 4 seconds there should be a random enemy spawning. And the next one takes a little bit longer. That's good. Yeah. See, I like this. This feels a lot better. It's a little bit more random. It kind of ups the pace of the game. So I'm going to change the max enemy's life back to 4. And we are going to go and look at something real quick. We are going to go and look at the first enemy that spawns. We're going to go bop it on the head a few times. 1, 2, 3. So there should only be now 3 enemies that spawn. So let's go and wait. We'll give it a little bit more time. We are now somehow at 5 and 6 and 7, and it's still going. Now, why is it still going? Well, we're not incrementing the enemy count at all, right? So the enemy count will always be under the maximum enemies alive. So at the end of our little on enemy spawn script here, let's increment that. So on enemy spawn, enemy underscore count, we'll do plus equals 1 to get that count incrementing. And now we'll test again and make sure that it only goes up to 4 enemies. 1, 2, 3, 3, where's 3? 3, and 4. Okay, so we have 4 enemies on the screen. Doesn't seem like there are any more spawning, but if I go and once again pop this one on the head and make it down to 3, we shouldn't see any other enemies spawn. Now, I actually don't like that. That could be if you, want to add like an objective like clear the level, defeat all of the enemies, but that's not really what we're going for on this. So to change that, we're going to need to add a new signal-based functionality that will actually give us so much more in the future that we can mess around with. So to do that, let's go to our signal bus and add a new globalized signal. This is just going to be for on underscore enemy underscore death. We'll create a new function for emitting on underscore enemy underscore death. And we'll just write on enemy death dot emit. Now that that's emitted, let's go and figure out where we want to emit it from, right? So the signal name itself should give a pretty big kind of indicator of where we want to put this. But there are 2 things that are kind of like, there's a whole like stepping stone system that we've got going on, like a whole kind of road, I guess, that actually leads down to getting to that point where the enemy can queue free itself. So let's go to our patrol enemy and let's have a look at that. We know that the health handler is a thing, so let's go check. The health handler has a typing system, very useful to keep in mind, and it just says if the current health is less than or equal to 0, call the death handler's handle health or handle death function. Okay, let's go look at the death handler. And the first thing you notice about the script is it's very small. There is practically nothing in here, which is actually pretty good thing for us because that means we can add to it a little bit without it being a bit too overwhelming. And all it's doing is just calling the drop handler if the drop handler is a thing, and then queue freeing the parent. That's it. So let's go back to the health handler. Let's go to this line here, this exported enum for the typing. Let's control C and then go to the death handler and control V, and we'll just use this typing again. And that is because we want to actually have the death handler kind of typed, right? We want to make it so that we can have 2 different types of death handlers without having to create 2 different types of death handlers. So all we need to do now is actually do a normal match statement to match the type of player or enemy. So first do player. And if it is the player, what do we want? Well, nothing, because the player has nothing that it needs to worry about. But the enemy, on the other hand, needs to use that new signal that we have just created and emit the on emit underscore on enemy death. There we go. So what this is going to do is now on the enemy's death, anything that wants to listen to this signal will be able to just listen to this signal and then do something based off of it. That means we can not only keep count of how many enemies are alive, we can keep count of how many have died, how many the player has bonked. We can do the math around how much health they have. Then we can do like fun little statistics where it's like you have bonked X enemies X amount of times. You could do one step further, you could add a signal for the player's death specifically, which means you could create a respawn functionality for the player, a extra live system, and a bunch of other things like that, and kind of keep track of those statistics kind of globally as well, which is very, very useful. So in this case, we just want to emit the on enemy death signal. And with that being emitted, that means we need to go to the patrol enemy's death handler and actually change the type of this to enemy. Now, it might actually make more sense to preset this to enemy and then just set the players to player, because nothing else will be set as player type for the death handler, but we don't need to think about that for now. That's just one of those little quality of life things you can do for yourself if you really want to. Yes, with the on enemy death handled, we now need to go back to our entity spawn manager, and we need to go to the ready function and reconnect, turn this timer start off because we don't need that. We can reconnect that signal bus signal. So call the signal bus, use dot on underscore enemy death dot connect. We'll connect this to the on underscore enemy underscore death function. I am going to make sure I'm spelling enemy correctly, because I am never spelling enemy correctly. I'm going to copy that and go all the way down to the bottom. Create a new function for it with the copy paste of the function name. And what do we want to do here? Well, simply put, we just want to go to the enemy count and do minus equals 1. So what this should now do is create that kind of infinite loop, right, where the enemy spawn manager is always trying to hit that maximum amount. When it does, it stops spawning. But when we go lower by defeating an enemy, it starts to spawn them again, or at least it spawns another one to replace that enemy. Now, we can change that as much as we want. And as I said, or as I want to say, this is me getting confused between the corrupt video and this one. In the future, I want to work on the enemy AI and give it extra functionality. Now, let's click play and just get this running and make sure that it's working. So we've got 1 enemy. This should go up to 4 enemies. There's 2. Just wait for all of these to spawn. 3. Can you spawn? Not up there. Okay. So we have all of our enemies, and as you can see here, they are able to push these coins around. Now, what I want them to be able to do is have a triggering mechanism in their AI where they will actually go for the coins. Like, they will push towards the coins, they will collect the coins, and upon collecting the coin, so upon that goal being reached, they will then try to leave the screen. And when they leave the screen, they can despawn, which means they have stolen the coin. Same thing as if they hit the player. They hit the player, they then try to leave and steal the coin. That way, it adds a little bit more to the game where the players now got to kind of move around a lot. They've got to actually try and go for these coins. It makes you want to pick that karma option more of bonking them on the head to get those coins back, which makes it just a little bit harder to stay on the good side of things, which is always fun to do to the player. It's always good to make them really think about their actions when they're doing something like this. Even for such a simple game like this, that can have massive impact on the enjoyment and the intrigue behind it. So with that in mind and our spawn counting, let's go and just bonk this 1 enemy on the head. So we should now be down to 3 for a little second, and it immediately spawned another one because that's the randomized spawn timer. Let's go bonk another one on the head. There we go. They have been bonked. And now we'll wait, and it spawned another one up here. We now have that kind of infinite loop of enemies and coins respawning, and that means we can, one, move on to the AI, which I want to do in the next video, and then finalize that upgrade system we were working on a little while ago, because that means we can actually move on to that stuff properly and not have any concerns about how our gameplay is working and how we can test this stuff. But yes, thank you for watching. I am very, very sorry if this has been a bit chaotic. It's been a bit chaotic recording session, but I hope you enjoyed. I hope it has been understandable, and if it hasn't, please let me know. The Discord is live. I will say this in most of my videos. The link is in the description. Please make sure to join if you have any questions or require help. You can, of course, leave comments and stuff. I will look at those when I get a chance to as well. But yes, thank you for watching. I hope you're having a great day, a great game dev journey, and I will see you in the next video.